Hey, folks, we're back again. At least we're back right now on YouTube. Let's see if we can get a comment or two from somebody on Facebook, and maybe both channels here can let me know if things are coming through okay.
You got sound on Facebook. I just had to turn the speaker off.
Okay, great, great. It's a good start. Robert, Cadet, maybe you could let us know if everything seems to be okay on YouTube. I just want to be sure that we're okay before we start talking again, I guess.
Yeah.
We have to start talking for them to tell us that we're okay.
True enough.
We're getting
True
all
enough.
kinds of sounds goods on Facebook, so we're
Okay,
good to go.
great. All right. Well, let's instead of talking about how to choose a telescope, maybe I should be picking how to choose a live stream program. Yeah, this is
Well,
all.
we have Zoom for telescopes and Zoom for live stream. So your choice.
Whoa.
Great. Yeah, nice.
Wah, wah,
Wah,
wah.
wah, wah. Well, folks, we're a lot better at the eyepiece than we are at this kind of stuff, and we never really wanted to do this. I didn't want to do this in the first place anyway. These guys talked me into it, so
Oh,
here we
yeah.
are. Didn't you?
No,
Oh,
tell
yeah.
the truth, Chris.
Yeah.
You said, guys, I got a great idea.
Did I ever? Yeah, yeah. And I deserve it then, don't I? You're right. Okay, let's try this again. So, welcome back, everybody. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Sunday night offering of the Astronomy Outreach Show, the Sunday Night Astronomy Show. I may be repeating myself, but I want to make sure that the people on Facebook could hear me last time around. Couldn't last time around, I guess. First of all, I'd like to welcome back Mr. Mike Powell from St. John and Paul Owen from Hampton, both amateur astronomers like myself who just enjoy sharing the hobby. And of course, we'd like to wish all the moms out there Happy Mother's Day. Hope you were all nice and spoiled today. We get our turn in a little bit, well, I guess less than a month now. So we all get lots of questions, of course, about what to buy for equipment. And I'd be willing to bet that there's hundreds of telescopes sitting in closets all around the country. Because people simply get frustrated with them. They tried to use them, and we all know what that's like. All of us have been there, I think, Paul and Mike, with the
yes.
equipment. Well, today we've got options too, like YouTube, where you can go in and you can type about a telescope or ask information, and someone usually seems to have the answer out there for you. So, but we're also here to answer your questions as well. So now for the next few shows, we're going to be making these more like a workshop. Getting you prepared to really make a sound decision on when you're purchasing some astronomy equipment, whether it's binoculars or telescope or something else astronomy related. I'm not sure about these guys, but I know I've made my fair share of mistakes when I purchased equipment, so hopefully you can gain by some of our experiences. And now these workshops might run a little longer. Certainly with the glitches, it's going to be a little bit longer already. But hope you can stay with us as long as we can stay live, and we have a lot of material to cover, and we'd like to take the time to answer all your questions too as well. So tonight's show is going to focus, pardon the pun, focus on optical tubes, the different types of tubes, the good and the bad of each type. And next week we're going to start with part 2, which will talk mostly about mounts that the optical tubes sit into. Then in part 3, we're going to discuss a number of essential accessories from eyepieces to dew shields. And it's not uncommon to spend almost as much on accessories as your telescope.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important. And finally, with part 4, we'll look at what you need to bring with you to get most enjoyment out of your evening. So Paul's going to present our first part of the talk tonight. And so sit back and enjoy. And remember, this is the live broadcast. So if you have questions about astronomy equipment, now is the time to ask them. So let's get started, Paul, if you would.
Okay.
With that talk on refractors.
Okay, so I'm just there. Can you see me there? I think you can.
I'm going to click onto you. So
Can
you're.
you hear me now?
Can you
both
see me now?
I need my coffee. I'm ready to go. Ready to go.
Here we go. All right. So, so my part of tonight's talk on OTAs. First of all, for those who don't know, OTA is optical tube assembly. So, depending on the level that when you get into telescopes, a lot of people buy their telescopes separately from the mount. So, if you buy it as a package, then it would be a telescope package or a kit. But typically, when you're buying a mount like, say, that one back there, typically you're going to buy that and you're going to use a whole bunch of different types of OTAs on the top of it. So when you hear the term OTA, when you're looking at some of these places that you can buy them, the OTA just simply means the telescope itself. It doesn't necessarily mean the mount, and it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot of other accessories. So from this point moving forward, when we talk about OTAs, that's what we mean, optical tube assembly. So, and before I get into the talk on refractors, if there are questions, please ask them right away. And Mike and Chris will be monitoring when I'm doing my talk, and vice versa. Whoever's doing the talk, the other two fellows will be monitoring the questions, because we want to get your questions answered, because that's really the whole point of this talk, is to try to educate you with as much knowledge as we have that we can offer to you. And if you have a question, we want to answer it right away, because that's kind of how we want this one to run. So please ask your questions, and the boys will look after that for my part. Okay, so I'm going to talk about refractors, and I'm just going to show my screen, or share my screen now, because I just have to do a couple of slide sort of things, and then I'll get into the hands-on stuff. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to see if I can find, there we are. So the first thing people think about when they think about a telescope is a refractor. Now, what you're looking at here on this particular screen is actually Galileo's first telescope. And it kind of looks like a walking stick more than it does a telescope. But it's actually, you think about this. This is back in the 1600s. They didn't have machining like we do today. They didn't understand optics like we do today. So this was a very, very crude makeup of a telescope. But Galileo did not invent the telescope, which a lot of people think, okay, who invented the telescope? It was Galileo. Well, no, it was not. The first person who invented the telescope was actually this fellow right here. And he was a Dutch eyeglass maker, and his name is Hans Lippershey. And he actually made and invented the telescope. And all it was designed for, what he designed it for, was so that you could look at things 3 times bigger. So, and it wasn't meant for the sky at all. It was just to look over. If I want to look across the yard and see something 3 times bigger, if I'm on a boat and I want to look, that's kind of what he invented it for. But it was, and he invented that in 1608. And it was just very shortly after that Galileo himself had actually, and I think it was 1609, had said, okay, I'm going to make one. He didn't actually take the one from Lippershey. He actually made his own, and he made it so that you could get different magnifications from it. So he had made actually different types of telescopes with different magnifications, and that was back in 1609, and that's entered Galileo. So that's when he came out. So that's kind of a little brief history on the telescopes that we're all going to talk about tonight. All came back from this Dutch glass fella, Hans Lippershey.
Excellent.
So now let me find, no, that's not it. There we are. Okay. So if you can see that screen there, this screenshots that I'm using is from a retailer and a manufacturer actually down in Arizona, and it's called Starizona. These folks are amazing. Starizona, by the way, are the guys that put when Chris Hadfield was on the space station, they had sent a telescope up so that he could actually take pictures of the Earth from the space station. And they sent up, and they had actually designed, after Celestron had designed first what they call a FASTAR, which is a lens assembly that you put in front of a Schmidt-Cassegrain to make the optics faster. Anyway, so now they have one, and they call it not the FASTAR, it's HyperStar is what they call it. So they took that design after Celestron decided not to use it anymore, and then they went crazy with it. And then a lot of people today are using that design. And that design is actually what went up to the space station. It was a C9¼ Schmidt-Cassegrain with a HyperStar lens on the front of it. And that's what you see a lot of these Earth-based pictures, or I should say space station-based pictures of the Earth are from that design. And so this company, Starizona, in Arizona, were the ones that did that. but they sell telescopes, and it's a great site. So if you go to their site, Star Arizona, there's tutorials, there's anything you want to know about telescopes, telescope design, if you want to take pictures, all that kind of stuff. It's a great site to go to. So this is where I'm starting. So this is basically, and I'm not going to cover all the stuff you see here. I just want to show you the pictures. So in the first picture on the top, what you're seeing is a refractor telescope design. So basically what happens is, if you follow those red lines, so this is the front of the telescope, and this is the piece where you would actually look into. That's the eyepiece. So the light goes into the telescope. It goes in and it passes through either 1, 2, or 3 pieces of glass. And then those pieces of glass, because they're bent and rounded a certain way, will actually focus the beams of light down to a certain point. Now, this particular thing you're seeing here is what they call a diagonal, and the reason they put that in is just so you can comfortably look into your telescope instead of having to bend down on the ground and look in the back end of it. You can look in the top of it when it's facing towards the sky. But anyway, so it goes down and it hits onto this diagonal, and then you can see that cross point, and it goes off of there and then goes up into your eye. So basically what it's designed to do is to take light, put it through a lens, 1, 2, or 3, and then come to what they call a focal point, which is where you can actually see everything in focus. And there's 3 different types of designs. You can get some really, really inexpensive ones that just have one element of glass in them. And basically what will happen is, by just having one element of glass, the trouble is there are 3 different color bands that we have to deal with. And there's the reds, the greens, and the blues. So through this type of lens, which is just a single point, all of those 3 light bands actually come to focus at different points. So it's pretty hard to get a picture without a lot of what they call aberrations. In other words, when you're looking at, say, something bright in the sky or dark in the sky with a bright background, you might see a purple or a green halo or something like that. Well, that's because the 3 points of light, the 3 colors of light, aren't meeting at one specific point, and that's where these aberrations come from. So then they've come up with what they call an achromatic type of a design, which uses 2 pieces of glass, one being a flint and one being a crown. So then the light goes through these 2 pieces of glass that are figured different from one another. One concentrates on the red band of color, and the other one concentrates on the blue band of color. So then what you can see is happening here now is the blue and the red are actually focusing at one specific spot, but you have the green light that's stray. So if you're, say, outside looking through one of these type of telescopes, say if you're birding or watching, birds or something, if you look at the branches, you'll see the branches nice and clear, but you'll see a green band on the outside of the branch. And that's because all 3 bands of light aren't being focused together, because there's only 2 elements of glass in there. Now, they improved that a lot by getting into what they call an achromatic doublet. And what they've done is they've figured the 2 lenses better. They've used special coatings so they're more anti-reflective and all of that sort of stuff. So if you use a really good doublet, you can get very close to an achromatic type of a design. It's still not the same, and where you'll notice it more than anything is if you're imaging. When you're actually taking a camera, taking long exposures, you'll start to really notice it in certain things. But on the outside, if you're using a good doublet with ED glass, then you're going to get relatively clean looking images. And then, of course, the 3rd type is the achrochromatic, and that uses actually 3 lenses. And the 3 lenses all concentrate on their own wavelength of light. So you'll notice that this particular design, the light goes through all 3 lenses, and all 3 lenses are figured so that when it comes to the focal point, all 3 bands of light are focused in one spot, so you don't get what they call that chromatic aberration. So that's basically a basic design of how a refractor works in its light path. And you can go, again, a single, double, or triplet type of designs. The most common ones that are out there for imaging, they're using triplets because they need to have that light focused very precisely. For observing, a good doublet is as good as a triplet in my estimation, if it's a good doublet, and that's where you would go. So if I'm going to go out and observe a lot and I'm not going to take pictures, I'd be very happy with a doublet refractor. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that screen. And there we are, and I'm back. So now we're going to get into,
Hang on a second, Paul. Yeah, okay.
sorry, questions?
No, all good. Just wanted to move
All
the
good?
screen across. Yep, good.
Okay. Okay, so refractor. So here's a little refractor. Mike and I were just talking about this. I happened to haul this one out and I forgot I had it. And as soon as I did, Mike says, look what I got. He had the same one. Anyway, so this is basically a little refractor that was designed. Oh, this is back in the, got to be like the late 70s, early 80s. And excuse me. And it's kind of a neat little refractor where basically it just, you focus it, or you adjust, yeah, you adjust the focus here. So it's a helical focuser. And then back here on this part of it, right there, that just allows the different types of magnification. So this is what they call a zoom telescope, because with this kind of telescope, you don't put an eyepiece in. This particular one that I have, unlike Mike's, has a fixed eyepiece to it. So then you just use the same eyepiece and then you just use it like a zoom type of a lens on a camera. And it's not a bad little daytime scope for birding and that kind of stuff, but it was just kind of a crude design. And I thought, well, isn't that cute? I'll show it to you anyway.
Great
Nice.
piece to sit on your shelf, like you said.
Yeah, and it's and you can throw it in your, you throw it in the back of your back seat of your car, keep it there, and if you ever decide that you're out anywhere and you want to take a telescope out, it's wonderful. Okay, so let's get into some of the designs. So what we have here, oops, if I can get it in here close enough. And I'm just going to drop that down a little bit because that's a little bit high. So this is probably one of the most popular telescopes. If I'm going to go out and buy a telescope and I'm buying my first refractor, this one here, I would not hesitate one iota to recommend to anybody wanting to get into stargazing and they're on a budget and they want a good telescope that's actually figured quite well for a doublet. So this design here is the one that we talked about earlier. That's got the two lenses in the front of the telescope. Actually, if I pull this off, I'll spin that around your way. And so there's the glass there. So that's what's in the front. So this particular telescope has two pieces of glass in it. And it is figured actually for the telescope in this price range is figured very, very well, and very, very little chromatic aberration on this kind of a telescope. So if you want to look at a lot of the bright objects, and the ones that you'll see that'll kind of give you false colors, will be the brighter things like the moon, Venus, some of the really, really bright stars, that kind of stuff. But this does a really, really nice job on that. One of the fellows from our club was asking me what to buy because he wanted to get just a little inexpensive refractor for observing. And I said, well, this is one I have. So he bought one, brought it to the house here, and we spent, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 hours just observing through this little 80 millimeter telescope. And what a surprise. Absolutely, what a wonderful little telescope. So this one's 80 millimeter refractor. So basically the focal or the size of the aperture is 80 millimeters. That's how wide the piece of glass is. And the focal length of this one is, get out of my chair for now. Focal length in this one, I should know this, but
500, I think.
What's that?
They're 500, I think.
400 millimeters.
Ah,
So it's a 400 millimeter focal length. So basically, that's a really, really good length. I'm just going to bring there we go. So 400 millimeters is a really good focal length, because the thing about 400 millimeters with a refractor is because it's such a small lens and such a short distance, whatever you're going to be looking at is going to be very
Oh boy. My connection point was lost. Okay. Shit. Where is it? All the issues tonight. Unreal.
Facebook people still, okay, I see you coming back.
I'm coming back,
So we're-
Paul. Yeah, just a sec now. We're going to make sure that we try to get back to our YouTube crowd too.
Okay,
Sorry, something happened here. Lost connection,
okay.
as that does happen.
Never happened before.
No, never.
The Facebook stayed live all along. It looks really good.
Yeah, it's a YouTube crowd. I dropped them, so, or it dropped them, I guess. Hang on
Yeah.
a second. I'm going to try to find them back again.
Okay.
Looks like we might be back. And just waiting to see it update.
I'll play the drums until they come back.
There you go.
I think we're back.
Oh no, it's great to rain here now.
I'm space trucking
That's a rain dance.
for you deep purple fans.
Okay,
Okay,
so
we back, Chris?
just bear with me for a sec, Paul. I'm just going to close a few more windows here. I've got way too many windows open,
Okay.
and
Must be
I want to
cold.
try to, yeah, yeah,
The flies getting in.
could be that too. Okay.
That's funny about that woman was on the thing and the guy says, you have to open windows. And she said, I did. He said, but the computer's still not working. Well, I got the window open.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Okay, sorry, Paul. I think we're good on both cases now. Looks like we're live. Let me get you clicked on YouTube so I can make sure that you're going to be the only one talking. Okay, let's try again. Sorry
Am I
about that,
back?
folks. I think we're back.
Okay.
Apologize for that. Just connection point. I'll have to talk to somebody that works at Bell, maybe, see if I can get that fixed.
Yeah.
You probably don't know anybody. That's the trouble.
No. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so where was I? I was talking about this refractor and
Yes.
talking about the focal length and the focal length of this refractor, what it's good for, what it's where it's strong. Where it's strong is for wide angle. The nice thing about a refractor too is in the daytime, if you like to look at nature, go out and look at say birds or whatever it is you want to look at in the daytime. Refractors are wonderful for that, especially something of this size because where it's so darn small. Like I say, you can take it with you anywhere. Keep it in the back seat of the car. It's just great for for that kind of stuff. So refractors are good for that. You can get into we were talking about the planets and whatnot. You can see the planets with this, but you'd have to have a Barlow, which is a device that gives you like more magnification. For those who are in the photography world, they call them tele-extenders. Just to give you more reach. So you could pop a Barlow in this and then use your lenses on that if you wanted to. But you can only get to a certain magnification strength before you start to get diminished returns from there. So when you're using a scope of this size, it has limitations magnification wise for sure. But for the person getting into the hobby, and again, you can use it for daytime and nighttime use. It's a wonderful telescope. Now these telescopes also come with little caps on the front of them. This here thing I'm putting on now, what we call a dew shield, and what that's for is when you're observing the night sky. Of course, the daytime as the sun drops, the temperature drops along with it, and then we get into these what we call dew points, where of course things start to dew up, and so the whole point of this is to keep the dew off of that lens. So by putting this on, the dew will actually collect on the outside of this before it even gets into the glass. So that's what this comes with. And then, of course, there's other things we'll talk about in another show about controlling that. Also on this telescope, it comes with what you can see here is a little cap, and there's a hole in the center of that cap. So the whole idea behind this actually does a couple of different things. But the main thing that it does is if you're looking at, say, a moon where it's 3/4 moon or almost a full moon, it's really, really bright. And if you don't have, say, a filter or something like that to kind of cut back on the light, reduce the light to get into your eye, it can be it's like looking at a light bulb. It can be that strong. So what you do with this is you slip this on the front, you take that cap off and you slip that on the front. And then what that does, that takes that aperture from 80 millimeters down to around, I think it's about 45 or 50 millimeters. And by reducing the aperture, it actually reduces the amount of light that goes through. So it'll actually make it a little easier for you to look at those bright objects in your telescope. Now, secondly, what you can do with it too, and what a lot of people do, is they'll take actually a piece of solar paper and put it on there, and then they can use it as a solar scope too. So if you want to do some sun observing using a proper, safe solar paper, you can simply put it on this, tape it to the back of it. It'll always be there, and just slip it on like that, and then you can go ahead and look at the sun with it too. So it's a nice all-purpose telescope. You can buy them at any of the Canadian retailers. And this one I bought up at KW Telescopes in Kitchener-Waterloo, and I bought it for $129. So it's a really, really good value. Now it's an OTA, like we talked about at the beginning. So it's just basically one, just the scope itself. I had to buy a tripod, but this is just like a camera tripod that I've got it on. And it just basically, you can move it back and forth, move it up and down. You can do all the things that you want to do typically with telescopes. So that's the first one I want to show you. The designs that from this point moving forward are all pretty much the same. Can you, maybe I can, right here. I just want to show you a telescope that you want to avoid if you can. And these ones, you'll see them a lot online. See if I can get that to stay there without falling over. Okay, so this is called MagnaCon. Sounds like something I should buy for a kid. And actually it is for a kid. So you'll see a lot of this type of telescope.
Is that 450 power?
Yeah, it's and 675 magnification.
675 power. Even better.
So the thing with this kind of telescope, first of all, it's very, very inexpensive, very cheap telescope. The eyepieces are plastic. The objective lens on this is probably plastic. The mount's very, very jittery. So when I put this down and you touch the scope at all, it just shakes. You can't firm this thing up enough to to get a good solid observation of anything. Because when you're magnifying stuff, looking at the night sky, the most important thing you got to have is a solid mount for that thing so that your telescope doesn't shake. So usually when you buy these department store type telescopes, the first thing they scrimp on is the mount, which is the most important thing. The optics are important in that they give you a clear picture, but the important thing is that you don't want to be, every time you turn your telescope or go to adjust it, have your picture shaking like this, because it won't be an enjoyable experience. It'll go in the closet, and just like this one, it'll be all dusty because you're not going to use it. So I really recommend to avoid this. To buy this telescope with its tripod and all the stuff that goes with it, you could probably get this for somewhere in the neighborhood of, $149, $199 is typically what you'll see these for at the Canadian Tires and places like that. And they do have better telescopes there than this type. But again, but when you look at that other refractor I showed you for $129, if you've got a camera tripod, you're less than $200 and you're getting a gazillion times better telescope that you can expand with, as opposed to something like this. So again, be very wary when what you think is a good deal, when they're brand new for a couple of $100 like this, complete with everything, they're usually not that good a deal. And the only other thing I want to talk about is the difference between refractors for observing and refractors for imaging. And basically the design is all the same. The light comes through, goes into the optics, and then comes out the back. When you're putting a camera on it and you want to observe something or image something for a long period of time, and you want good, solid, stable non-movement from your camera, you have to have a really good focuser. So lots of times when you're buying telescopes, they come with their focusers that are relatively good, but lots of times what will happen is most of us will end up changing out the focuser itself if we're going to do some taking pictures of the night sky. But for observing, if that's where you want to start and that's where you're going to stay, all of these telescopes that you get, the observing part of the focuser is absolutely fine. The only thing you got to be careful of is if you start using 2-inch eyepieces, diagonals, Barlows, you're putting a lot of weight back there, and that's when you're going to find out how good or not that your focuser is, so whether you may or may not have to change it. All of these telescopes here, this one, that one, they're all using stock focusers. That one's a Teleview, come with a really good focuser. I'd never have to change it. That one that's back there, that's Stellar View. I did change the focuser on it, and I put on a motorized one only because I didn't want to have to touch it, so I could use it remotely. So you can do all different types of things with refractors, but all the principles we talked about in the beginning are all the same. You're either going to get a doublet achromat with okay glass, an achromat with really good glass and coatings, or an apochromatic, which is a triplet using 3 pieces of glass. And that would certainly be the most premium telescope you use, certainly for imaging, and questionable depending if for observing, if you have a really good doublet type of a telescope. So that's my story on refractors.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul.
Okay.
Great talk on refractors.
And you're
And
sticking with it.
what's that? What was that, Mike?
And that's a story, and he's sticking to it.
Agreed.
That's it.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to be up next. And Paul, when we talk about refractors and reflectors, there is quite a difference in them. And I'm going to try to get into just a little bit of topic about that now. So just bear with me for a second. I'm going to switch my camera so I can get a wider field of view here when I get up and take a look. There, that's a little better. So there's my room. And there's my cat at my feet. Anyway, so what I want to talk about now is the actual reflector design. And reflectors are different in the fact that they use lenses more than mirrors. So I'm just going to bring a page over here. Actually, I'm going to probably have to share my page. Share my screen. And I'm going to say share screen 1. Should be the same. No, that's not going to do it, is it? Let's go unshare.
That's the 3D effect.
Yeah, that's that one. I don't want that. Stop screen share. Let's bring me back. Let's try share screen 2. And share. Okay, so this is basically what I'm looking
There
for.
you go.
There. So when we're talking about reflector telescopes, we're talking more about mirrors than we are lenses. And the idea about a reflector, I'm just going to talk about Newtonian reflectors. There are others out there, but Newtonian ones are the ones that are the most popular. So they were invented by Isaac Newton back in the 17th century. And it was they were invented as an alternative to refractor telescopes because the refractors back then, they suffered a lot from chromatic aberration. So these colors and things that you would get around the edges. And lenses are harder to make than mirrors are. So they're more costly. So the idea about a reflector telescope is that they do have many designs. Almost all the major telescopes around the world are actually reflecting type telescopes. So what happens with the reflector, if I can just bring over to the image here for a sec, get my right mouse going. Here we are. So we've got a large mirror here at the base, and then we have a smaller mirror up here, which is called a secondary mirror, and it's supported by a web type affair that I'll talk about here in a second. So the light comes down, hits this large concave mirror here. That concave mirror allows light beams to focus back up and hit the secondary mirror, and then that comes out to your eyeball right here. So it's a very simple design, but it allows for large apertures, and it allows for lots of light gathering. So let's take a look at a couple here. I'm going to try to drop this guy out of the way. I'm just going to stop sharing here for a second. Stop screen share. Put it back to me again, maybe. Here we go. And full screen. Okay, so let's take a look here behind us what they are. And I'm more of a show guy, not a show guy, but more of a showing guy. So I'm not going to use as many slides as Paul did there. I'm just going to actually show you what they're like. I spend more time under the night sky. Don't really talk a whole lot about telescopes, so I'm going to be a little bit rougher on it than Paul was for sure. But this is what you might see as a typical design for a reflecting telescope. I know it's reading backwards there. I think it's reading backwards on YouTube, but it's reading the right way on Facebook. Get that one. Okay, so we've got a reflector telescope. So what it is, a long tube. And at the base of the tube, I'm going to point this around once I get this base loosened up. We'll have a look down the end there. If I can get down the end. Might have to lower it down a bit. Just bear with me. I'm going to lower the legs down a bit. Or actually, maybe I can just lift the, no, let's lower the legs. Hopefully this will do it. Okay, just the tripod legs. And there now you can see the mirror at the base down there.
Yeah, right there.
Okay, so there's the mirror at the base, and then right at the very front here is the secondary mirror, and it's supported by a spider bracket, which has 3 arms there. And it's sitting at a 45-degree angle and is pointed out this way to the eyepiece right here. So, the basic idea, looking through the eyepiece here, the mirror's at the back, brings the light back up, focuses it to the small mirror and sends it out to your eyeball, the secondary mirror. So what happens with these is that these can be made very large, and they don't suffer from chromatic aberration at all. So they give you a nice clear image. The other thing is that they're the cheapest telescope to buy for the least amount of money, I guess I should say. The largest telescope to buy for the least amount of money. So if you want large aperture, which you usually do, you want large aperture because the larger the aperture, the more light gathering ability the scope is going to have. So the large aperture for a cheap amount of money. And that's the advantage of the reflector telescopes. There are different designs. This one's called a solid tube, as you can see. And I'm going to set this one out of the way for a second. And I'll show you the larger one back here. This is what's called a Dobsonian reflector, but we're not really going to talk about mounts too much. But it's a very simple design. In fact, with the mount that it just tilts back and forth this way or back and forth this way. Now we're going to talk about mounts next week. But you can see here is that there's a top piece and a lower piece. Let me see if I can get that camera down a little bit to show it. Let's tilt this a little bit. Let me get it. So we've got the top section. We've got poles, truss poles that connect the top and bottom. And then we have a bottom section. And in the bottom section is the large mirror. And I'm going to take the cover off it so we can take a look at it. And there's the mirror at the bottom. Again, same idea, large mirror, concave shape, concave shape, up to the secondary. The secondary is supported with a bracket, and the secondary, in this case, is covered with a cloth, but there it is. You can see that it's pointed at a 45-degree angle or 90-degree angle and points it out to the eyepiece here. So they're a very simple design. The good thing about a reflector that I find is that we don't have to deal with issues like dew, since the mirror, the large mirror, at least not on a large mirror, but the large mirror is down at the end of the tube. And on refractor telescopes, you usually have to wrap your telescope with dew heaters or provide some type of a dew shield to allow you to eliminate dew in the evening, of course, when the telescope gets cool. But in this case, we have a large column of air sitting in here. So it takes a lot longer for that moisture to reach the bottom of the telescope at the mirror. So it's really not affected. Now you might get a bit of dew around the secondary mirror up top, but that's something that you can handle very easily with a smaller dew heater. So dew is not as big a concern with reflectors. Here's another smaller reflector that we're going to look at. And this one is actually a tabletop design. So let's tilt the camera back up again. Sorry folks, just trying to make some odd adjustments here. Too much. There, maybe that. Okay, so here's the other design, tabletop design. So this is similar to the larger one, the Dobsonian mount, only a very small scope, but still very powerful, 4.5-inch mirror. And we can see the mirror down here at the bottom, the reflector. And the secondary mirror sitting here again, mounted on a bracket, and your focuser is out here on the side. The finder on top, we're going to talk about that when we get to accessories about telescopes, but that's what we use to find our objects in the sky. But again, a very simple design, back and forth, up and down, and that's the Dobsonian mount. Didn't want to talk a whole lot about mounts, but wanted to talk more about the type of telescope that this is. Okay, so there's an issue with some of these, and you are going to have an issue if you carry one of these out to your vehicle, and you take it to a park or another location, or if you happen to bump it, you are going to find that your mirror are not going to be aligned properly. Now, with refractor telescopes, that's not an issue because you've got lenses. You're using lenses that are fixed, and here in the mirrors, these are mounted. So we'll have an issue where we have the image collect down here at the larger mirror, but as it brings the image back up again and tries to hit the secondary mirror, it might not hit it at the right spot. And then, of course, that's going to knock your image out of focus. So collimation of a telescope is something that you need to learn about, and there's lots of YouTube videos out there about learning about how to collimate a telescope. There are manual, I'll call them collimation tools. There's a tool that you can insert in here that has a small pin in it that will allow you to see the secondary and the pins on the primary mirror, and you can align it that way. But I'd like to use today we have the use of a laser beam. So I have this device that sits in here that has a small red laser on it, and it points at the secondary mirror and all the way down to the primary. I don't know if we can see a center spot on this little guy or not. No, there's no center spot in this one. It's too small. There might be one in this one. Yes, there is. Okay, so here's the difference in design. This is a Bushnell. I'll call it a department store design. Looks really fancy. But one problem with this one is that if you want to try to align the two mirrors together, which is really important because this is the issue that a lot of people get into, the primary mirror at the back does not line up with the secondary mirror in front, and then it'll be out of focus. But if you look at the bottom of that mirror, there's no what we call a center point there. So we don't know where the middle is of that mirror. And the only way to find the middle of that mirror is to take the telescope apart, measure the distance, measure the mirror, and then mark a tiny little marker, or a little one of those, used to call them a Hilroy little rings that used to fit around your protector to protect the pages on a book. You put one of them in the center, and then you could center spot your mirror, and then you'd be ready for it. But this is the way it comes from factory, so no center spot, so no way to actually mark it. So that's the difference in price with some of these. This little guy beside it is roughly the same price. This is an Orion Star Blast 4.5. But if I bring it down, it might be a little hard to see, but there is a center spot marked on the bottom of that mirror. So it gives you a starting point. So what we do is we mount our collimator, laser collimator in here. The laser beam hits the secondary mirror in front and then hits the primary mirror at the very back. Then we want to get that laser beam to sit in the center dot of the center of the mirror at the back. And to do that, we would adjust these three knobs here in the back. So 3 of these knobs support the mirror, and the other 3 knobs are just set points, just to lock it in place. So we'll have to turn these knobs back and forth. You find a combination, loosen one up a little bit, tighten the other 2 the same amount. And that mirror will move back and forth until we get the laser beam hitting directly in the center of that mirror. So we've got that one lined up. Then our second thing we have to do is make sure the secondary up front here is aligned with the center point of that back mirror. To do that, we have 3 little tiny screws here. Once we install the laser up here, we can see the laser output coming out here, and they have a circle with a bullseye in it that we can point to. So that allows us to line up both mirrors correctly. It only takes a couple of minutes once you start doing it. With a solid tube telescope like this, it does not have to be done very often. I mean, if you're carrying this one actually just tilts down like that. You pick it up with your hand, and there you go. But it wouldn't receive a lot of abuse. When I transport scopes like that in my car, I usually put them right in the front seat and fasten the seatbelt around them. So that keeps them sturdy. But the simple point is that small reflectors have to be collimated every once in a while. Not often, but every once in a while. And it all depends on how you treat it. If you're just taking it outside to take a look at the moon, you've got it in the house, you probably never have to collimate it, maybe once every couple of years or so. If you're taking it outside and you happen to bang into something with it, the mirrors may get out of alignment. So that is something that you might have to consider. But with this guy back here, because the poles go together every time, it supports the bottom section and the top section are supported by these long tubes. They never get in exactly the same place every time. They're always just a little bit out. And no matter how I mark the poles, which I do, I've got them marked 1, 2, and 3 so that I know that where they would go on the scope. Doesn't matter, they'll still be just a little bit of an alignment. So every time you set up this telescope, you have to check the alignment on it, so their collimation on it. So I do that, and it only takes a matter of a minute or so. It's very quick. A lot of the telescopes now come with a lot larger knobs. So up in this case, for the secondary, for instance, might be a little hard to see, but there are little what they call Bob's knobs here that sit on the top, and they make it easier to adjust your secondary mirror. Of course, you want to be very careful. If you've got your telescope standing up like this and you're using an Allen wrench, that's usually what they come with, or maybe even a Phillips screwdriver, that you don't drop your screwdriver or your Allen wrench in and smash your primary mirror or crack it. So that's why these little Bob's knobs are very, very handy. They stay in there, and they're just little tightening knobs. We pull out the Allen screws and install these, and they stay in there permanently. On the base of the telescope, if I can get around to see the primary section on this one or not, not sure. I'm going to drag this one out for a minute. This one is actually it's a Meade 12-inch Dobsonian, and it was in really rough shape when I first got it. So what I've done with it is that I had it wrapped. So this is actually the Hubble Space Telescope, one of its 40th anniversary picture. I took it to a local sign shop, and they took the tube and wrapped it for me. And I had the top and bottom here powder coated. All the poles were powder coated. So it kind of ended up kind of nice. And what I was trying to show was the bottom of the plate. I don't think I'm going to be able to see it, but on the very bottom down here, there are 3 larger knobs that you can adjust to adjust your primary mirror as well. So it's the same procedure. You'd install your collimation tool in here. You'd let the laser beam hit the secondary mirror up top. It would go down to hit a center point on this mirror, which this one is marked. It would come back up and hit the secondary again, and then bounce back out. So we'd adjust the large mirror points first to make sure that the laser sits in the center. When it comes back up, it might not be lining up with the secondary. We'd adjust those 3 knobs, of course, on the top to give us an alignment for the secondary mirror. And then it would come out here to your focuser. In this case, I put on a 10-to-1 focuser. I just found this was much better. And again, we're going to talk more about accessories during the next, I guess, in part 3 of this workshop series. So one of the things that you got to consider, of course, with a reflector telescope like this type of design, it's very hard to get this long tube into your car. It won't really fit in the back seat of my car. I'd have to put seats down really to fit it in my vehicle as one complete piece. But that's the idea of the truss tube. So I can separate it with these 3 bolts, take the top section, the bottom section, and the poles all separately, and they'll all fit in the back seat of my car. And I can get up to a 16-inch telescope in the back of my car like that. But the one thing that you have to consider, of course, is that all this stray light is going to come in from all directions. So you want to try to eliminate the stray light as much as possible. So we would put a wrap around this. It's called a shroud, and it would be black, hopefully black on the inside too. And what it does is it eliminates all the light from trespassing into our light path. Now, when you're looking at the moon or a planet, it doesn't really matter much. You don't really need the shroud on. But when you start looking for deep sky objects that are really faint out in the night sky, and you really want to get more detail on them, then you would want to put your shroud on. You can also get something called a light shield that mounts up here. Didn't actually bring that with me, but it would mount around the top of the telescope so that when you look in the eyepiece, you're not getting stray light coming in this direction as well. So reflectors. Wrap up on reflectors, I guess. The simple idea is that they are a little bit harder to collimate. You do have to collimate them, but that doesn't happen all the time. It's something that's pretty rare. And again, depending on what type of reflector you buy, if you buy a long tube like this, it's less likely to go out of alignment. If you buy a telescope like this, a truss style, it's more likely to be out of alignment every time you use it. But again, it only takes a few minutes to do the alignment. It's very quick. if you're purchasing one of these and you're buying one off Kijiji or some other place, keep an eye on what the retail price is on them, and you can get some good buys on a used one as well. But you're always going to get a larger mirror for the least amount of money in a reflector style. The other thing I should mention about a reflector too, maybe right off the top, was that the mirror is concave, so you're actually going to get an upside down image when you're looking through your eyepiece here. So that's not really important to anybody who does any kind of night sky viewing, really. If you've been on some of my live feeds, you've seen a lot of my live feeds where I've offered the moon or something else, and the image has been upside down, even left or right. But what's left or right or what's upside down, really, it's just depending on where you are on the planet. If we want to talk about Australia right now, they'd say we were upside down. Right? And when the shuttle's going around the Earth, or when it used to go around the Earth, when they looked up, the Earth was above them, or it might have been below them. So what's upside down and right side up in space? I mean, what is right? What is up and what's down in the universe? We don't know. So it really doesn't matter much. I don't pay attention too much to the fact. It is annoying if you want to use it through the daytime. So that's one good thing about refractors, like Paul talked about there. And even binoculars are really a type of refractor telescope. Two refractors maybe joined together. So you've got the ability to use them in the daytime sky. So you've got a right side up image, I'll say. And you can use them looking at a ship in the water or for birding or whatever. But with a reflector telescope, you've got to get used to the fact that if you're looking at the moon close to the horizon, it's going to be upside down. That's not really been a problem for anybody who gets into it for a while. When I'm looking at Saturn or Jupiter, I'm not really caring if it's upside down or not. Maybe the moon, it might be a little bit harder to get yourself oriented on it, but you can even get a moon map now that shows you the reflector image. So it shows you the map upside down, as if you would view it through the eyepiece. So it's easier to follow that path. So I guess to wrap up, reflector telescopes, different because they're mirrors and they're not lenses. It's a lot more difficult or a lot more costly to make a lens than it is a mirror. And most of the major telescopes around the world are actually reflector telescopes, that design. And they give you the largest mirror for the cheapest amount of money. And it really is about gathering light. So we call these light buckets, basically. It really, any telescope at all, the magnification doesn't matter. You can see these telescopes being sold for, like Paul said earlier, 675 power. Well, if you've got a really poor image coming out through your eyepiece, that just means it's 675 times worse than it was when you looked at it otherwise. So if you try to zoom in on the moon and it's all blurry, and you throw your highest or your lowest number eyepiece in the telescope, then it's going to be much, much blurrier. So it's not really about magnification in this hobby, and that's the confusing part to a lot of people. I know they look at a telescope like a microscope, and they're not the same. We're looking at the macro world or the mini world, I guess, in a microscope, and the large world in a telescope. So they are different. So what it's really about is the amount of light that the telescope can gather and how it can focus it to a point and provide you with a nice image. When you have a reflector telescope, the larger the tube, the more light it's going to be able to gather. So I would suggest that if somebody was going to consider a reflector telescope, buy the largest one you can afford. But also consider the fact that they have to be portable. This one sits on a not so nice mount, which we are going to get into later on. Why they set up EQ1 mounts for beginners in the hobby is beyond me, because that's the most frustrating part I would find of getting started in the hobby. Not the telescope itself, maybe the fact that the mirrors are out of alignment. That's a very simple fix, but learning how an EQ1 mount works compared to a Dobsonian type mount, this style. So we're going to talk about that next week. The simple mounts, the easy mounts, the more complicated mounts. But any of these tubes can mount on any of those mounts. So last point, I guess, reflectors. Very good design, very simple to use. I like the idea of mirrors. Now, I guess there was one other point, was the fact of cleaning them. Paul, with his refractor talk, can talk about the lenses themselves, because a telescope like Paul's, a refractor telescope, is basically a closed system. It's not sealed by any means because there is a diagonal that goes on the other end in your eyepiece and stuff, but it is basically two pieces. It's more sealed than these are. And these ones are more susceptible to not just dew, but to pollen. And when I'm at the beach, there's a lot of salt air kind of thing. So you might get a lot of coating on your mirror down below. So that requires a cleaning, and that can be another process. And it could be something we talk about on a future show as well. But cleaning your optics is not something that's always necessary. You wouldn't believe the amount of dirt that you can get on a mirror's surface before it affects your ability to see the sky. There's an awful lot of dirt that would have to be on a mirrored surface. So the suggestion is that if it starts to affect your vision through the telescope, then clean it. Never take a flashlight to it, because when you take a flashlight to it, you're always going to see dirt. You're always going to see dust. It's going to irritate you. So leave your flashlight aside. Never look at it with your flashlight. But you might want to look at it in the daytime. And if you do see marks of pollen or things on it that are sticky pieces, of course, try to get it cleaned. The way to clean these mirrors, though, is that, again, we'd have to remove the primary mirror. So there's 3 screws around here. We can take this whole section right off. There are cheaper designs of these as well that don't work at all. Paul, we can talk about them, I guess, afterwards. The reflectors with the Bird Jones design, I think it's called. Anyway, the idea of cleaning these is to remove the mirror, and then, of course, when you put it back on, you're going to have to recollimate the telescope line. The mirror's back up again. Now, cleaning a mirror is another topic altogether. I would suggest you not do it on your own without looking up some research on it to do it, because you can scratch the surface, and then once the mirror surface is scratched badly, then you'll have to get it recoated again. And I have had my mirror recoated on mine once because of the environment that I usually have it. I usually have it set up down at St. Rest Beach in St. John, and there's a lot of fog down there, and hopefully there are too many nights when fog's there, but there can be a lot of dirt with cars driving by, that type of thing. So it's not a big project. It does take you a little bit of time to do it right. You have to have the right products. But again, it's because the telescope is wide open in both cases, not just with the truss design like that, but you've also got a column here, and your secondary mirror is mounted up top here. So they can present a problem for cleaning. I wanted to talk a little bit about the cap too, Paul, right? So it's another thing that goes on the front of the telescope is this dust cap. So whenever you can, you always try to put your dust cap on, keep the dirt out, and try to put your eyepiece back in as well, of course. But there's also a centerpiece here that pops off, and there's a reason for that, as Paul and I were talking about just before the show. That has a hole in the center of it. So if you're looking at the bright moon, for instance, and you want to dim the moon down because you don't want to see as much light, put your cap back on and remove the centerpiece, and you will get a bit of an obstruction because it's there in the center. So you will cut down about 90% of your light, or about 80% of your light that hits your back mirror. So there are times when you're looking at a full moon, for instance, and it's very bright and you haven't got a moon filter, you can just put your cap back on, remove the centerpiece, and that will lower the light level down to a comfortable level for you. Other than that, a lot of people take their front lens and make a solar filter out of it. So if you put a piece of Baader film here on the back, you only need a tiny hole to see the sun, because the sun's so bright, you really don't need much for a hole in your front cap. So solar filter properly installed at the back of the cap, placed on the scope like that, and you can look at sunspots, for instance. You won't catch solar flares, but you can see sunspots. So a lot of people take their caps and they adapt them for that purpose. Some caps have front caps like that have dual holes, and they allow more light through. And they can miss your secondary altogether, so you can control the amount of light that you get through that way as well. Not sure what else I can talk about as far as reflectors go, but any other questions on there, Paul?
No.
Or any other points you'd like to bring up? Focal length, maybe?
Just something that I was funny you were mentioning about putting a shroud on your Dobsonian. And you said how the light trespasses, and I thought, wouldn't that be neat? Why don't they call it a trespass?
Yes.
Oh,
You go through your trust. Yeah.
trespass. Okay. That's not really a question, was it?
No, I guess
I hope not. I hope that's not the audience we're entertaining here. We gotta grow with Paul's jokes. We have to go along with them, folks, for a little while. So
it's
Bear
the
with
only
us.
thing that the mind works on its own.
it is. I don't know if there's
Chris,
any other questions.
we have a question here on Facebook from Bob Barrett. He says, I have a finder scope like the one in your Bushnell. Is there a better finder scope or type for that telescope?
Yes.
And I have Celestron Power Seeker 114, and I'm having trouble lining my lining up my finder scope.
So let's watch this one, Bob. Just a second. I'm going to take this one off because that one has the 2 pins on it as well. Takes me a second here to get these unscrewed. But I would recommend something like this, the Horizon Easy Finder. Don't know if I can get the light turned on. Oh, of course, the battery's dead on it.
The one time, eh?
One time, yeah. I think it is. Yeah, it's dead. Yeah, of course it is. So anyway, this Orion Easy Finder, where's my camera? Up here. Okay. The Horizon Easy Finder has a red dot pointer in the center. So when you turn it on, it projects a small red dot onto a little window that's inside here. You mount that on your scope. Let's bring the scope back over again. So we could remove this one. And this one would actually sit right on its place in the same location. And on the side of this is an adjustment. Oh, there, sorry. No, it's still there. On the side we have an adjustment, and we have an adjustment on the bottom. So what we want to do, of course, is to point this at an object, say a light pole or a light itself. In the early evening is nice. And then you're going to place your red dot on that light, or you're going to try to center the light up in your eyepiece first of all. Get as close as you can. And then you're going to turn the small wheel on the bottom and the side wheel over here, and the dot is going to move back and forth or up and down. And then you're going to have it centered up on your eyepiece. So when you point the red dot at your object in the sky, it will be in your eyepiece. It's that easy to do. On the front cap here is a 2032 battery, like those standard watch batteries. You just pop this off. That's one style of finder. Maybe while Mike's talking, I can bring up. Actually, what we're going to do is talk more about finders and our accessories thing. So I've got a whole collection of different style finders, different types of finders, including Telrads and other devices. So we'll get into finders, Bob, more when we on week 3 when we start talking about accessories. Here comes my cat in the picture. Yeah.
That's the space cat.
Space cat.
You'll find her.
Yeah, he'll find it. Oh, Molly. Anyway, that's the typical. It's called an Orion Easy Finder 2. This one. So very simple, very easy to use, very nice to use. Very seldom you ever get any dew on it, but you can wipe it off there easily. It does come out with a very nice bright light.
What's the price?
They run about $30, I guess.
Okay.
On Amazon. Might be a little bit more now, of course, with the U.S. dollar being so much better than ours at the moment. It could be $130. Hard to
I
say.
actually picked up 5 on eBay, 5 of them for $29.
5 of them.
Yeah,
5, not 29 each, but all 5.
all 5 from SV Boney.
SV Boney,
They
yeah.
were $25 for 5 of them.
Wow. So they were about 6 weeks delivery. But
6 months delivery, but
yeah, still, if you can wait, all of a sudden you get this surprise in the mail and say, "Wow, I didn't know that was coming. I forgot all about it."
You can supply your friends with finders.
You can.
yeah, well, that's why I bought all 5.
So-
Inevitably, somewhere someone will not have a finder.
True enough. It always happens. Any other questions about reflectors? So that again is just a simpler design. It's a mirrored type of operation. Again, the hardest point about the whole thing is really collimation, keeping things lined up, and that is only needed to be done on this style of telescope maybe every once in a while when you happen to bump it from moving in and out of your car or something like that. But seldom do you ever have to line up one that's a solid tube. More often, of course, with the truss tube design. But again, very simple operation. We'll talk about collimation tools actually in our accessories talk too. We should talk about those. bring those up as one of the accessories that are essential for a reflector style telescope. And there are different styles of collimators as well, not just the laser style, but there are some that are cheaper and some that are better. So sometimes cheaper is better and sometimes it isn't. But that's a Bushnell 4.5 inch and on a rickety mount. Same idea with Paul's talk there about telescopes. Here we've got a nice long tube, but look at the movement. So that's just in the mount itself. And we can talk a little bit more about the mount, but the legs themselves too will move around quite a bit. It's a very thinly made tripod, and to get the price point into an area where people will consider it, that's the other factor. When you're purchasing a telescope, it's a major investment. You need to consider it as a major investment, even if it's a small scope like this. You know, this is a major investment for anybody because money is hard to come by, for one thing, and secondly, it can be a lifetime toy. So the thing about these manual styles like these and these reflector designs is that you can get the largest aperture for the least amount of money, again, and they are a major investment in the fact that you might only want to buy one in your lifetime. That's fine too, because the sky is never going to change. You're never going to have to change that idea. So when you're looking at reflectors, take a look at the reviews on them mostly when you're looking at them. These Bushnell designs like this, they might not have the very best of reviews because they don't have a center point to collimate them. They are a little bit more difficult to collimate. Again, a lot of plastic parts like this plastic finder. That's I keep losing it there. Like this plastic finder that's on top, not the very best of quality, but they do have their uses for sure. And if you have a telescope like this, it's still better than no telescope. So most of the ones that we've ever come across in this style of design have been something that we've been able to repair for the person to get them out at least observing some of the sky and get it out of the closet. That's the big part. Get these scopes out of the closet, get them out and use them. And if you have questions with them, just let us know. We're happy to help you. So hopefully that's covered most of the information about it. Cheap for a big mirror. That's my idea. And that's my story to it.
All right.
So let's get my chair back and we'll flip us back to normal conversation. I guess there's no other questions.
Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to skip the Rosanna's and we'll go
Okay.
right into Mike's.
Okay, just bear with me here, Paul. I'm going to just
Yeah,
back here for a second.
and we'll do the Rosanna next week.
Okay. Drop that one out of the way. Okay, let's click onto you here. And I need a second to update something, as you know, for what we're kind of looking for. Oh, it's always the issue, isn't it? Let's see if it works this time. Get my volume turned up. I think I do. And it's time for.
Oh no.
I thought we were going to skip.
Yeah, we're going to
Oh, we're going to skip it. Oh, I thought we were doing it now.
No.
Look at me already. I finally got it working. And well, that's just great.
Yeah, that's good. That's okay. It'll be twice as good next week.
Oh, we're going to skip it all together. Oh, you didn't say that, did you? All right, Mike, that's enough. Anyway, that's the voice that we'll be using for next week.
Yeah.
See, I was all nervous doing my talk about telescope, all nervous. I wasn't listening to the rest of it. Got to start listening more often.
I can do my fun fact about compound scopes. How's that?
There.
you go.
Okay. Let's click on to you, Mike. It's your turn. I'm done.
My turn.
I'm done for sure.
I don't know what to say after listening to what you guys had to say.
I kept mine very simple, so just bear with me, Mike. I'm going to take myself back to the other camera first of all. I do want to make sure I don't lose you at the same time, so let me go back to myself here.
I don't mind staying the small guy in the corner one little bit.
No, sorry, pal. Let's see if this works. There, I think that's better. Well, if it was any better, I'm closer, so more ugly, but let's get clicked onto you here. There, and you're up on that one. Okay, we're good in both. Oh, the music was. Fe Girl Katsuya says, "Wow, that music was great."
That's my daughter.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay. It is great.
So am I up, I guess?
You're up, Paul. You're up, Mike. Yep. Let's talk about SCT telescopes.
All right. So Paul originally talked to you about refractor telescopes, which are called a dioptric, and then Chris talked to you about reflector telescopes using mirrors instead of lenses, and that's called a catoptic. And then I'm going to do a little bit of both. It's a compound scope. It has a lens, it has mirrors, and so they call it a catadioptric. Now, if you get your tongue twisted around that, that's pretty good. The cool part was that the catadioptric is not just used for telescopes. They were actually used in searchlights, headlamps. Early lighthouses used them for focusing the light. They're used for telescopes, and they've been used as telephoto lenses on cameras. So, it's a pretty versatile setup. The first one I want to talk to you about is actually called the Matsukov Cassegrain. So here is a 90 millimeter Matsukov Cassegrain. Now, when you look at them at the front, it is just like a reflector. It's got a mirror at the back and it's got a secondary mirror at the front, but it also has a corrector lens up here in the front. And what that does is it corrects the light path so that green light that Paul was talking about is actually centered in off the reflective surface and up in your eyepiece, so it gives you very little or none of the chromatic aberration that you would get off a cheap reflector or a cheap refractor. But if you look at this front corrector lens on the Matsukov, number one, they're extremely thick, and number two, they're extremely curved. It's got a wild curve in it. I don't know if you can see it from where you are.
Yeah, you can see it clearly. Yeah.
And the other part is the center mirror. It's not like a Smith Cassegrain. The center mirror is usually just an aluminized piece on the corrector plate itself to reflect the light. It's got a little shroud around it, and that little shroud is just to keep any stray light from bouncing off the inside of the optical tube. And then if you look inside the tube itself, there's the secondary mirror, and there's a tube in the center. And again, the light comes in, hits the primary mirror, at the back of this, goes up to the secondary mirror on the corrector plate, and then reflects down through that center tube and onto the diagonal and up into your eye. Now, I'm not to be taking scopes apart here online, but I wanted to show you quickly just what the Matsukov looked like. And if I may share my screen for half a second. You go here, share screen. This one, share. This should show you the light path of the Matsukov Cassegrain telescope. So the light comes in, reflects off the mirror at the back. Now these mirrors, a good quality reflector would have a parabolic mirror. In Cassegrains, they are actually a spherical mirror. So it comes in and hits the spherical mirror at the back, goes up, hits where the secondary aluminization is on the corrector plate on the front, and then comes back down through that center tube and up to the eyepiece. And if you look at the back here, where this red section is, you can see that the blue comes to one point, the green comes to another point, but they come to the same focal point. They're not adjusted from each other. So the green doesn't come out in front or behind the blue. It comes in at the same focal point that the blue does. So the Matsukov Cassegrain is an all-around really good scope. What they do have, unfortunately, is a large focal length for the size of aperture. So this is an 80 millimeter, but I do believe it has a focal length of 1200 millimeters. So whatever you're looking at, you're going to be zoomed right in on. Number one, they make a fantastic planetary scope if you're looking for planets. But if you're going to do deep space, you don't want a 90 millimeter Matsukov Cassegrain. You might want to go to something with a little bit bigger diameter. Matsukov, the problem with the corrector plate being so big and so thick, they normally only make them in a smaller size, like a 90 millimeter or say, up to a 105. They're usually smaller apertures because it's extremely expensive to build that corrector plate. But because they are a smaller aperture, they're pretty good for the amateur astronomer. You know, if you want to do some planetary hunting and have a portable piece, that's a nice little way to go. The other type is a Schmidt Cassegrain. I'll just get rid of this, and I'll pull up this one, and I'll make it large, and I'll share my screen. Share. I'll share this one, and you can see here the Schmidt Cassegrain. It's very, very similar, but if you look at the corrector plate in the front, it's a very thin piece of glass. Actually, it's not nearly as thick as it is on the Matsukov. The second part is it's got two spherical mirrors. The primary mirror at the back here is spherical, and the secondary mirror here at the front is spherical. But they're tuned to come in, and again, you'll see the blue and green shift here at the back, but they come to the same focal point. So the corrector plate is actually correcting the light path of the green, and you get very little chromatic aberration off this type of scope. Now, they're saying that every amateur astronomer will eventually own a Schmidt Cassegrain telescope. I disagree. If you can see by this picture.
Yeah.
Schmidt Cassegrain is a very, very, very popular scope for amateur astronomers.
It's in this. Would you think that this? I get a question, Mike. Somebody's saying, "Is this an obsession?"
Oh, hell no.
That was my question.
An
Back to that.
obsession is a 30-inch truss Dob.
Okay. Never mind talking about trusses. That's not nice.
But this one here behind me is an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain telescope. I'm not going to talk about the mount. Just going to talk about the optical tube itself, the OTA, like Paul was saying. Again, if you look at the front, there is a corrector plate, the glass in the front here. That can get dirty on you, but the mirrors will stay relatively clean because the rest of the system is a virtually closed system. Unless you take your eyepiece out and get some dirt or dust in that way, there's no real way for dirt and dust to get inside the optical tube. So being a closed system, there's an advantage to it being cleaner. You can get larger aperture for a decent price because of just the way it's made. It's going to be a little bit more expensive than a reflector because you've got something with a corrector plate in there. But for the aperture, there's still a relatively good price. The good part about it, if I was to say there was a pro, is the size of it. It reflects the light 3 times. So they put a large or a fairly good aperture in a long tube into a short tube or a short box. Light comes in, bounces off the back, that's 1, bounces off the front, that's 2, and comes back to the diagonal back here, which is 3. It's very portable because of its size and the fact that it's been compressed into a small package and bends the light 3 times. Other advantages to me for the Schmidt Cassegrain is when you turn the focus knob back here, you're actually moving the primary mirror. You're not just focusing an eyepiece, you're focusing the mirror. And so you have a lot of focal length forward and a lot of focal length backward. So if you wanted to do some type of astrophotography using these scopes, almost every single one of them will accept the camera without issue because of the amount of focal range that you have with the mirror movement. I believe it's over an inch of mirror movement that you can get inside. Show you quickly, this is what the primary mirror of an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain looks like. There's the hole in the center, the mirror itself.
Careful.
But if you look, they're tapered on both sides. So it's thinner out here than it is in the middle. You look at reflector telescopes and it's pretty much the same thickness right across. Excuse me. I don't know if it's done this way for cooling or why it's tapered or if it's just done that way because they can make it cheaper. And again, the mirror itself is not parabolic. It's actually spherical. Now, I've heard people say that spherical is not the way you want to go with a reflector style telescope, but everything I could find says in a Schmidt Cassegrain, Matsukov Cassegrain, the mirrors are spherical, not parabolic. So. The secondary mirror, or the one that the light reflects, goes down to the primary and up on the secondary, if you look as well. And I thank you, Paul, for selling me these. I got them for demonstration purposes only. As well, it's spherical. So if you look at it, You can see it's not flat. It's a pretty thick piece, and it's spherical as well. And again, the advantage to these things is the fact that you can use them for astrophotography, depending on what kind of mount you decide to put it on. You can accessorize the heck out of them. In this particular one, I've got dovetail plates, top and bottom. So, there's useful if I want to put, say, a guide scope on the top of this. Then she mounts up there, and I have now a guide scope on the top if I want to do imaging. You can put a focuser on the back. So usually when a slight disadvantage is something called mirror shift. When you're focusing, the mirror may shift a little bit and it'll throw you out of focus. If you have a mirror lock on some of them and set this, then you can adjust and just use the focuser, and that eliminates the mirror shift out of these systems. Again, very nice scope, good for all around use. I would say that the 8-inch Smith Cassegrain would be the workhorse of the amateur astronomy world in the beginning. For people that want to use an all-around scope, they want to use it for astrophotography, they want to use it for viewing, they want good aperture, and one disadvantage to it is focal length. For an 8-inch aperture, you're getting 2,000 millimeters of focal length. That might be a little bit too powerful if you wanted to get into doing some astrophotography. The advantage to it is you can buy focal reducers to go in the back. And you can take this from 2,000 millimeter focal length and basically bring it down to about a 1,200, which is great for getting that object with a nice view of the space around it. But portability, they're small. You can fit it in your car. You can take it with you anywhere you want to go. Cool down times that you let the mirrors cool down. I've never run into that issue. I've always had my scope sitting out all day, or if we're at the star parties and stuff, you set the scopes up early. And I've had no issues with cool down on the mirrors or anything like that. No different than any other scope. The advantage is you can accessorize these to death. Depending on what kind of a mount you want to put it on, you can put it on the mounts that we're going to talk about next week. You can do equatorial, you can do alt-azimuth, fork mounts, whatever you so choose. Just a good all-around scope to begin with. Again, you got large aperture, good focal length. One disadvantage is, like the Newtonian, you have to collimate. You may not have to collimate it as much as a Newtonian telescope because the only thing that's going to move in this one's a secondary. And the 3 screws here in the front, very, very simple. You can buy Bob's knobs and adjust it. So you run into collimation issue every once in a blue moon. Again, the advantage is it's a closed system, so it stays clean. You can always blow with air if you get a little bit of dust on your corrector plate. And, for the most part, they're good all-around type of scope. There was just something I was going to quickly say before I finished up. I was trying to keep it short here.
That's great.
I guess that's about it. That was the pros and cons. That's what we wanted to cover. If I was to turn around, like I said, we're not here to tell anybody what type of scope to buy. We just want to show you the different types and tell you the advantages and disadvantages of each one. Aperture, like Chris says, is what we're always looking for. If you get the largest aperture for the lowest price, you have to decide what it is you're going to do with the telescope you want to buy. If you're just doing viewing, that's great. Dobsonians and things like that are perfect for you. If you want to step out and start moving cameras into this stuff and doing astrophotography, then it's time to sit back and take a long, hard look at exactly what you want to do. Do you want to use the scope for all different purposes? Do you want to use the scope for a single purpose? I mean, it's got to be an investment, not a toy. When you go out and you're thinking about buying a car, you sit down and you think about it quite a bit before you decide to buy one. Well, you should do the same thing with these. Think about exactly what you want to use it for. You're not going to buy a Pinto and then take it off road, right? It's just not built for that. So what you want to look for is a scope that's going to suit what you want to do with it. Make it an investment, and that way it won't end up in the closet, and you'll end up with something that you'll enjoy for a lifetime. I enjoy it so much. Yeah, I got a wall full of them. Maybe it is an obsession. But But, you know, a little bit of everything. When you can't make up your mind, that's what happens.
That's it.
So,
I
that's
do.
about all we have to say on that.
We do have one question here. Robert's asking, how much of a job is it to install Bob's knobs on an SET?
Very simple. Basically, what you get is 3 Allen screws in here. Your little hex in. You take an Allen key and you pop them in. Bob's knobs, you take out one at a time. Take out one, put in one. Take out one, put in one. Don't take out all 3, or you'll hear this tink, and your secondary mirror will be facing downward somewhere inside the tube here. So they're simple to do. They come with instructions. They're made for your scope. But yeah, do them one at a time, not all 3 and then put 3 in, because you won't. You'll get 2 out, and somewhere you'll hear a tink before that 3rd one is all the way out.
Right. And again, I guess it's less common to have an issue with collimation on an SET, as it would be with a reflector, I guess, probably. But
well, the reflector, you get the 2. You're really collimating both mirrors. You're collimating the one at the back with the 3 screws at the back, and then you're up at the front with an Allen key or a screwdriver, whatever you have, collimating the secondary mirror to it. These ones here, you're only collimating the one mirror. The primary mirror sits on a great big tube, and it's pretty fixed in place, and it doesn't do a whole lot of movement.
right.
So, you know, moving it around, you're not bumping that mirror too much, and it doesn't make a difference on the primary. You're just collimating the secondary.
So that's optical tube. So yeah, we're going to talk more about the accessories part of it, the collimation and stuff, as we get into our topic on week 3. So thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Lots of information there. And we still got Paul on here, I can see. So
He's muted.
He is muted.
There you go.
Muted.
There, he's back.
I said something earlier and I thought, oh,
Nobody heard you.
I forgot I was on mute.
Yeah,
That's okay. It was probably a good thing.
probably a good thing.
I did want to mention one thing about SCTs. You can get them anywhere from a 5-inch right on up to a 14-inch.
Actually, 16 and 20 is available if you got the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Talking big tubes now. Yeah.
That's some big tubes.
yeah.
I mean, each of us have our favorites. I know Paul's favorites is refractor, pretty well, I'd say. Mike, I'd say your SCTs or your reflectors are really mine. I'm a big fan of the Dobsonian type because I like them because they're simple and they're again the largest aperture, largest aperture for the cheapest amount of money per square inch of mirror. But you want nice crisp images of night sky stuff, just go take a look at Paul's some of Paul's images. Are just amazing, and most of his have been done through wide field refractors, like just amazing clarity and like just amazing beauty. He's even had them focused in the Sky News magazine. So Mike, with planetary stuff, SCTs are awesome for that. You get a really nice long focal length, or a large number for focal length, I should say. 2,000 millimeters, pretty big. When I talk about the 11-inch CPC I've got is 2,800 millimeters, so really pushing it to get in that close. So, but again, those are the 3 style of optical tubes. Now our ideas here are just basically to get you familiar with what we're talking about. So when you go to a store and you start to select what you want, or you're on Kijiji and you're looking around, or you're on that site Astro Buy Sell that Paul talked about earlier, it is an idea. What we're trying to do is bring you the information that you require to get out there and make your choice. So this week was optical tubes. Next week's talk is going to be all about the mounts. So there are the Dobsonian style mounts, like this style I showed earlier, this back and forth, up and down, very simple design. We've got this ball style mount back here. This is an older scope, Edmund Scientific. And then we have EQ style mounts, like the one we showed here with the Bushnell on it, and they come in different styles as well, different sizes, computerized mounts. We're going to talk about Alt-Az mounts versus EQ mounts, what the difference is. So then you're going to have your talk about optical tubes covered, or talk about mounts are going to be covered. You're going to want to know how to match the 2 of those together. That's going to give you the best fit and the best for you. And then we're going to talk on week 3 about accessories, what accessories you're going to be wanting to look for. When you're negotiating your price for your telescope, you're going to want to know what accessories come with it. You can actually spend as much on accessories as you do on a telescope. That's easy to do, especially when you're buying a reflector on a Dobsonian mount. You might only pay $300 or $400 for that, but you might spend more than that on accessories over time. You don't have to buy them all at once, but we'll talk about the ones that you require just to get yourself started, like finder scopes and maybe a collimation tool if you're using a reflector. A good comfortable chair. Would you guys agree that a good comfortable chair is something that you need to have down the road? Because when you're sitting and you're comfortable in a chair, then you're relaxing. You're not all kinked over and worried about your back. You're more focused on what you're looking at. So red flashlights, all those kind of things we're going to talk about as we come into week 3. But this week was optical tubes. I'm glad, guys, that we covered as much material there as we did. I know we were a bit long on our talk, but mostly I guess was me with technical glitches. But next week we're going to be all about mounts, and then we're going to try to give you enough information to put it together to be able to go out and purchase one of your own. And of course, we're going to be here to offer you some information along the way. Just looking for comments here. Made some notes. Great. Some people get discouraged because the telescope views aren't like the ones they see in astronomy magazines or Hubble. Exactly, Dan. That's it. You aren't going to see that. And maybe we'll show some examples, Paul. You can probably bring up some examples next week of some reflector shots that something you would see through a reflector, an SCT, common SCT, and some night sky or Mike you as well. Of course, I don't do photographs. I leave it up to these guys. I just share their photographs. But anyway, we'll show the views through each one, and we've covered a lot of material, I think, here tonight, but hopefully it's get you started to think about reflectors, refractors, and SCTs. What's the difference between all three? Now that you can go back and review the video, you'll know what to look for and what would work for you. So with that, in closing, I guess tonight we're going to say thanks everyone for all of your continued support of our efforts here. I want to remind you again that we do love getting your photos. You can send them into SundayNightAstronomyShow@gmail.com. It's SundayNightAstronomyShow@gmail.com. We're going to collect them for now, and then we're going to put them up once this series of workshops is over. In the 4th week, we'll start focusing again on our photos. And I would normally say special thanks to Rosanna for her fun facts, but I guess that's my mistake. So we'll hold them. Thank you, Rosanna, for next week's fun facts.
You were a trooper, Chris.
I tried. I tried to make it happen.
Nothing but determined.
And of course, I want to thank Mike and Paul here. Of course, that makes the group makes these evenings so special and so much fun. I would like to say too that if you've enjoyed the content here tonight, please consider giving us a like on the episode on YouTube if you're following us there, and please consider subscribing if you're on YouTube as well, if you haven't already done so. I would also ask that you share this with your friends and family, that we are live every Sunday night, and we have been now for I think 27 weeks or something like that.
Wow.
I think I reported some numbers to the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada today on the last number of weeks, and I think over the last 8 weeks we've had about 25,000 views. So it's been very good. And finally, we'd like to wish all of you a good and healthy, safe week, of course, with all this pandemic thing going on right at the moment. Congratulations to all of you here in New Brunswick for flattening the curve. We've done extremely well here in New Brunswick, and we're very, very pleased that we're probably one of the safest places in North America to be living at the moment. I'm really looking forward to getting back to St. Therese Beach again soon, so we are working on some ideas, Mike, I guess. Hoping that we're going to be able to bring some type of outreach to you this year. This is the new normal, folks. This is what we have to accept at the moment. But we can get through all this, and this too will pass. So keep washing those hands, practice your social distancing, of course, stay at home if you can, and know that we are here to help entertain you each week at the same time. And so for now then, from Mike, Paul, and I, stay safe, everyone. We hope to see you again here next week for workshop number 2, which we'll be talking all about mounts. And as we like to say, guys, keep your scopes pointed up. Thanks, folks. And we're sorry we went a little bit long tonight, but hope you got enough information out of that. And we're going to see you again next week at the same time. Take care. Have a great week, everybody.
Good night.
Night.